In the year 1647 of the Third Age, when the kingdom of Arthedain still stood proud against the encroaching shadow of the Witch King, there lived, in the green hills of the Shire, a hobbit named Peregrine Took the Younger. Unlike his more famous descendant, who would one day serve the steward of Gondor, this Peregrine was a scholarly sort, keeper of ancient lore, and student of the elder days. The autumn morning that would change his fate forever began much like any other. Peregrine sat in his study at great smiles, poring over a collection of weathered scrolls that spoke of the Númenórean settlements in the north. The fire crackled pleasantly in the hearth, and outside his window, the golden leaves of the party tree danced in the gentle breeze. A sharp rap upon his door broke the peaceful silence. Standing upon his threshold was a figure that seemed wholly out of place in the comfortable confines of Tuckborough. A ranger of the north, tall and grim, with eyes that held the weight of many dark leagues traveled. "Master Took," said the ranger, his voice carrying the authority of Fornost itself. "I am Malbeth, servant of King Arvedui. The crown has need of your particular expertise." Peregrine's round face paled. "Expertise? Good sir, I am but a simple keeper of old books and forgotten tales. What use could the king have for such as I?" Malbeth stepped into the smile without invitation, his keen eyes taking in the shelves lined with ancient tomes and maps of forgotten realms. "You are the only scholar west of the Misty Mountains who has made study of the Witch King's domain. The crown has learned of writings you possess, texts that speak of the old roads through Angmar, and more importantly, of what lies hidden in the Iron Mountains." The hobbit's hand moved instinctively to a locked chest beside his desk. Within lay his most precious possession, fragments of the annals of the Witch King, recovered from the ruins of Fornost after its first fall to Angmar's forces decades past. The texts spoke of horrors beyond imagining, but also of a great secret buried deep within the enemy's stronghold. "The king knows of the annals," Malbeth continued, noting Peregrine's gesture, "and he knows that you alone have deciphered their darkest passages. War comes to the north, Master Took. The Witch King musters his forces for a final assault upon our realm. We must know what power he seeks in the depths of Carn Dûm." Peregrine's comfortable world seemed to crumble around him. "You cannot ask this of me. I am no warrior, no spy. I am a hobbit of the Shire, meant for gardens and library, not for the haunted wastes of Angmar. Yet you are the only one who might find what we seek." Malbeth replied gravely, "The texts speak of the Palantir Fuin, the dark seeing stone of the north. If it exists, and if the Witch King claims it, then all of Eriador falls to shadow. You must guide us to it before he does." The weight of destiny settled upon Peregrine's shoulders like a mantle of lead. He looked once more at his peaceful study, knowing that if he accepted this burden, he might never see the green hills of home again. Yet if he refused, those same hills might burn under the shadow of Angmar. "When do we depart?" he asked quietly. "At dawn," Malbeth answered. "Pack light, but bring the annals. The road to Angmar is long, and darker than you know." As night fell over the Shire, Peregrine sat by his fire. The forbidden text spread before him. The ancient Sindarin words seemed to writhe in the firelight, telling of evils that should remain buried. Yet buried within the darkness lay a single thread of hope, a riddle that might yet save the North from eternal night. The fire burned low, and in its dying embers, Peregrine thought he glimpsed the shadow of things to come. Vast mountains crowned with ice, ancient ruins where once great towers stood, and somewhere in the depths of that accursed realm, a power that could either save or damn them all. He would carry that vision with him into the wild. The company that gathered at the Brandywine Bridge in the gray hour before dawn was small but hardy. Malbeth, the ranger, two of his kinsmen named Thurin and Galleon, and one very reluctant hobbit wrapped in a traveling cloak that seemed far too large for his diminutive frame. Peregrine had never ventured beyond the borders of the Shire, and the world beyond the bridge seemed vast and threatening. The East Road stretched before them like a ribbon of uncertainty, leading toward perils he had only read about in the safety of his study. "The first stage of our journey takes us to Weathertop," Malbeth explained as they rode. From there, we turn north toward the Etten Moors and the dark borders of Angmar. The road grows perilous with each mile. They rode in relative silence through the lone land, that empty region between the Shire and the Troll Shaws. The autumn weather held fair, but there was a bite in the air that spoke of winter's approach. Peregrine found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, unused to the vast emptiness that surrounded them. On the second day, they encountered their first sign of the gathering darkness. A group of refugees from the northern settlements had made camp beside the road, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. The Witch King's servants raid as far south as the Weather Hill. Their leader, an old farmer named Borin, told them, "Black riders on the road, and wolves that fear neither fire nor steel. We flee to Bree, but even that town may not be safe much longer." Malbeth questioned the refugees closely about what they had seen, and Peregrine noticed how the ranger's jaw tightened with each grim report. The enemy's reach was extending faster than anyone had anticipated. As they climbed the weathered slopes of Amon Sul, the ancient watchtower of Weathertop, Peregrine felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. This hill had seen the passage of king and the fall of kingdom. Now it might witness the beginning of the end for all free peoples of the north. From the summit, they could see far into the distance. To the north, the land grew increasingly desolate, stretching away toward the brooding presence of the misty mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay their destination, the Iron Mountains and the fortress of Carn Dûm. "Tomorrow we leave the road," Malbeth said, studying the northern horizon. "From here, we travel by hunters' paths and forgotten ways. The enemy's eyes are upon all the main routes." That night, as they camped among the ruins of the old tower, Peregrine opened the Annals of the Witch King by firelight. The text that had seemed merely academic in his comfortable study now felt charged with ominous power. He read aloud the passage that had first caught the attention of the crown. "In the deepest vaults of Carn Dûm lies the Palantir Fuin, the dark seeing stone wrought by the mouth of Sauron in mockery of the stones of Elendil. Through its black crystal, the Witch King sees all that passes in the north and speaks with his master across the leagues. Yet the stone holds a secret that even the Lord of the Nazgul knows not. Within its depths lies bound the spirit of Beren the Bold, last king of the Rudor, who sought to master the stone and was consumed by its power. Should the binding be broken, the king's wrath might be turned against his captor, if one could find the words to wake him from his crystal sleep." "A dead king bound in a palantir," Thurin muttered. "What manner of hope is this? The only hope we have," Peregrine replied, closing the book with trembling hands. "If the legends speak true, King Beren was a mighty warrior before the shadow took him. His knowledge of Angmar's defenses might be invaluable if we can find a way to free him." The wind howled across the hilltop, carrying with it the scent of distant snow and something else, something that made the rangers reach for their weapons and caused Peregrine's heart to race with primal fear. "We are watched," Galion whispered, his bow already in hand. From the darkness below came a sound that chilled the blood, the hunting cry of wolves, but wolves such as no natural pack had ever bred. These were the wargs of Angmar, and they had caught the scent of their quarry. The siege of Weathertop was about to begin. The attack came with the rising of the moon. From the shadows at the base of Weathertop emerged shapes that seemed to flow like liquid darkness, wargs of unusual size and malice, their eyes glowing with an inner fire that spoke of their unnatural origin. Peregrine cowered behind the broken stones of the ancient tower, while the rangers formed a defensive circle around him. Their arrows flew true, finding their marks among the climbing beasts. But for every warg that fell, two more seemed to take its place. "They seek the Hobbit!" Malbeth called out between shots. "The enemy knows of our mission." The largest of the warg, a creature the size of a small horse with fur black as midnight, broke through the outer defenses. It leaped directly at Peregrine, jaws agape, but the Hobbit surprised both himself and the beast by rolling aside and striking out with a walking stick that suddenly blazed silver light. The warg recoiled with a howl of pain, and Peregrine stared in amazement at the staff in his hand. It was the same gnarled oak branch he had carried from the Shire, but now it seemed to pulse with inner power. "The staff of Radagast!" Malbeth shouted in recognition. "How do you come to bear it?" I found it in my garden," Peregrine stammered, still fending off the circling wargs. "It was just a walking stick." But there was no time for explanation. The pack had regrouped and was preparing for another assault when a new voice rang out across the hilltop, a voice that spoke words of power in the ancient tongue of the Eldar. From the northern approach to Weathertop came a figure robed in gray, his beard flowing like silver in the moonlight. The wargs fled before him like shadows before the dawn, and soon the hilltop was quiet once more. "Gandalf," Malbeth breathed, lowering his bow. "But how come you here?" The wizard approached their small group, his keen eyes taking in the scene of battle. "I have been tracking these same creatures for many leagues," he said. "They are not mere beasts, but servants of the Nine, sent to prevent your mission from succeeding." He turned to Peregrine, who still held the glowing staff with trembling hand. "And you, young Master Hobbit, carry more than you know. That staff was given to Radagast by the elves of Rivendell, imbued with power to hold back the shadow. How it came to your garden is a mystery, but not an accident." "You know of our mission?" Peregrine asked. "I know many things," Gandalf replied gravely. "I know that you seek the Palantir Fuin, and I know that time grows short. Even now, the Witch King prepares his final assault upon Fornost. If he succeeds in claiming the full power of the Dark-Seeing Stone, all hope for the North dies with the last king of Arthedain." Malbeth stepped forward. "Will you join us, Mithrandir? Your power would be a great aid in the trials ahead." Gandalf shook his head. "My path lies elsewhere. The White Council has tasks for me that cannot be delayed, but I will give you this counsel. The road to Angmar is watched by more than wolves. The Witch King has set guardians upon every path. The Barrow Wights stir in their tombs, and things of deeper darkness walk the wild. You must find another way." "What other way?" Thurin asked. "The main passes are surely guarded." "There is an old path," Gandalf mused, "forgotten by most, but known to the wise. It leads through the Etten Moors and past the ruins of Rudor's ancient capital. The way is hard, and it passes through the realm of the Hillmen, but it might serve." He turned to Peregrine and placed a hand upon the Hobbit's shoulder. "Guard that staff well, young Took. It may be the key to more than you imagine. And remember, in the darkest hour, when all seems lost, sometimes the smallest light can push back the greatest shadow." With those words, the wizard departed as suddenly as he had come, leaving the company alone once more beneath the stars. But something had changed in the brief time of his presence. The very air seemed cleaner, and the path ahead, though still perilous, no longer seemed hopeless. "We rest until dawn," Malbeth decided. "Then we turn aside from the road and seek this path the wizard spoke of. The Etten Moors are treacherous, but they offer concealment that we shall need." As the others settled into their watch, Peregrine studied the staff in his hands. In the starlight, he could see that it was carved with symbols he did not recognize, runes that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. Whatever power dwelt within the ancient wood, it had chosen him for reasons he could not fathom. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of dark towers and crystal spheres, of ancient king and the weight of destiny that pressed down upon the small shoulders of a hobbit who had never wanted anything more than a quiet life among his books. The real journey was about to begin. The path through the Etten Moors proved to be everything Gandalf had warned and more. The ancient marshlands stretched for miles in every direction, a maze of stagnant pools, treacherous bogs, and twisted trees that seemed to watch their passage with malevolent awareness. For 3 days they picked their way through the waste, following game trails and the occasional stone marker left by travelers of ages past. The air hung thick with mist that never seemed to lift, and strange lights flickered in the distance, will-o'-wisps that some claimed were the spirits of the drowned, forever seeking to drag the living down into their watery grave. Peregrine had thought the Shire's old forest was frightening, but the Etten Moors were something altogether worse. Here, the very land seemed actively hostile to their presence. More than once, what appeared to be solid ground gave way beneath their feet, and only the ranger's skill and the curious power of his staff kept them from being swallowed by the marsh. On the fourth day, they encountered the Hillmen. The tribe that found them was small but well-armed, their faces painted with blue spirals that marked them as descendants of the ancient Forodwaith. Their leader, a grizzled warrior named Brock, studied the small company with suspicion. "Rangers of the South," he said in accented Westron, "you walk the old paths without leave. Why do you trespass in the lands of the Hillmen?" Malbeth stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "We seek passage to the north, to the borders of Angmar. We mean no harm to your people." Brock's eyes narrowed. "All who walk north seek the Witch King's realm, but few return. What business have you with the Lord of the Nazgul?" It was Peregrine who answered, much to everyone's surprise. "We seek to prevent a great evil from awakening. The Witch King searches for a weapon that could destroy all the free peoples of Middle-earth. We would stop him, if we can." The Hillmen muttered among themselves in their own tongue, and Brock's expression grew thoughtful. "The small one speaks truth. I can hear it in his voice, but the way you seek is death. The northern borders are watched by the Witch King's servants, and darker things still guard the approaches to Carn Dûm. Yet we must try," Peregrine insisted. "Will you help us?" Brock was quiet for a long moment, studying the Hobbit with new interest. Then he noticed the staff in Peregrine's hand, and his painted face went pale. "The branch of Radagast," he whispered. "The legends spoke of its return in the hour of great need. How do you come to bear it, small one?" I'm not entirely sure," Peregrine admitted. "It was given to me in a way, by powers I don't fully understand." The Hillman leader knelt suddenly, much to the amazement of his warriors. "Then you are the one who comes before, spoken of in the old prophecy. My people will aid you, bearer of the branch." And so it was that their small company was joined by 5 Hillmen warriors, led by Brock himself. The grizzled chieftain proved to be a skilled guide, leading them through secret paths that avoided the worst of the marsh devils and the haunted pools where ancient things stirred. But as they drew closer to the borders of Angmar, the very air seemed to grow thick with malice. The mist took on a greenish tint, and the sparse vegetation withered at their approach. Strange sounds echoed across the wastes, howls and cries that spoke of creatures that should not exist. On their last night in the Etten Moors, as they camped on a small island surrounded by black water, Brock shared the legends of his people about the northern realm. "Long ago," he said, "before the Witch King came to rule, the Iron Mountains were home to the dwarves of Khazad Dûm's northern kindred. They delved deep into the earth, seeking mithril and other precious metal. But they delved too deep and woke something that should have remained sleeping." "What did they wake?" Peregrine asked, though he feared the answer. "The Nameless Thing," Brock replied, "a creature of shadow and flame that had slept since the elder days. It drove the dwarves from their halls and claimed the deepest places for its own. When the Witch King came to Angmar, he made a pact with the creature, power for power, darkness for darkness." Thurin spat into the fire. "Dwarf tale and superstition," but Brock shook his head. "The Witch King's power is not his own. He draws it from the depths, from the thing that dwells in the roots of the mountain. And the Palantir Fuin, it is not merely a seeing stone. It is a conduit, a link between the Lord of the Nazgul and his dark patron." A chill ran through the company that had nothing to do with the marsh wind. If Brock spoke truly, then their mission was more dangerous than they had imagined. They were not merely seeking to steal a Palantir from the Witch King, they were preparing to venture into the very heart of darkness itself. The staff in Peregrine's hands pulsed with silver light, as if responding to the threat. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with the power of the wise at his side. But first, they had to reach the Iron Mountains alive. The border between the Etten Moors and Angmar was marked not by any visible barrier, but by a change in the very nature of the world itself. The moment they crossed that invisible line, the temperature dropped by 20 degrees, and the sun seemed to dim as if filtered through smoke. Before them stretched a landscape of desolation that beggared description. The hills were bare and black, scarred by ancient fires and scored by the passage of fell creatures. No grass grew upon the poisoned earth, and the few trees that remained were twisted into shapes that hurt the eye to look upon. The Witch King's realm, Malbeth said grimly. Here, the shadow lies heavy upon the land. They traveled by night now, hiding during the day in whatever shelter they could find. The borders of Angmar were patrolled by creatures that served the Nine, not just orcs and warg, but things of deeper darkness that had no names in the tongues of men or elves. On their second night in the Witch Realm, they encountered their first orc patrol. The creatures were different from the goblins of the Misty Mountains, larger, more cunning, and bearing the mark of the Witch King upon their crude armor. The rangers dispatched them silently, but not before Peregrine noticed something troubling. The orcs wore amulets of black stone around their necks, and when the creatures died, the amulets cracked and released wisps of shadow that seemed to seep into the ground. They're not just soldiers, he whispered to Malbeth. They're conduit. The Witch King is using them to spread his influence, to poison the very earth with his presence. The ranger's expression was grim. Then we must move quickly. The longer we remain in this accursed land, the more we risk corruption ourselves. They pressed on through the night, following Brock's guidance toward the Iron Mountain. The hillman knew the ancient paths that wound between the watching posts and avoided the worst of the enemy's strongholds. But with each mile, the oppressive weight of the Witch King's power grew stronger. On the third day, they crested a ridge and saw their destination. The Iron Mountains rose before them like the teeth of some primordial beast, their peaks shrouded in perpetual storm clouds. And there, carved into the face of the largest mountain, was Carn Dûm, the Witch King's fortress. Even from a distance of several miles, the sight of the dark citadel was enough to chill the blood. Towers of black stone rose from the mountain's heart, and baleful lights flickered in windows that seemed to watch the surrounding lands with malevolent intelligence. There, Brock pointed to a narrow defile between two peaks, the Red Hawk Pass. It leads to the base of the mountain, but it is guarded by the Barrow Wights that serve the Witch King. Barrow Wights? Peregrine asked, though he feared he knew the answer. The spirits of ancient kings bound to the Witch King's service, Malbeth explained. They guard the approaches to Carn Dûm, and their touch brings death to the living. As they studied the pass, a new voice spoke from behind them, a voice that made their blood run cold. Death to the living, yes, but not to all the living. They turned to find a figure standing among the rock, tall and pale, wearing robes that seemed to drink the light from the air around them. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but from the darkness within came a sound like distant winter wind. I am the mouth of Sauron, the figure said, and I bring word from my master. The Witch King knows of your coming, little thief. He offers you a choice. Serve him willingly and live. Defy him and join the Wights in their eternal watch. The Rangers reached for their weapon, but the mouth raised a hand and they found themselves unable to move. Only Peregrine remained free, the staff of Radagast blazing with silver fire in his hand. You cannot touch me, the Hobbit said, surprised by his own courage. The light of the west protects me. The mouth laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The light of the west? That fades, little one. Already it grows dim in Rivendell, and Lothlorien loses its strength. Soon, all will be darkness, but not today, Peregrine replied, raising the staff higher. And not by your will. The silver light blazed brighter, and the mouth stepped back with a hiss. You delay the inevitable. The Witch King will have his prize, and when he claims the full power of the Palantir Fuin, not even the Valor will be able to save you. With those words, the figure vanished like smoke, leaving only the stench of corruption behind. As the paralysis left them, Malbeth shook his head grimly. We are betrayed. The enemy knows our purpose. Then we must move swiftly, Peregrine said, before the Witch King can prepare his defenses. Brock nodded. There is another way, older and more dangerous, but hidden from the enemy's sight. The Forgotten Gate, built by the dwarves before the Shadow came. It leads directly into the heart of the mountain. But what? Thurin asked. It passes through the domain of the Nameless Thing, Brock finished. Better to face the whites than to wake what sleeps in the depths. Peregrine looked at the staff in his hands, feeling the power that flowed through it. He thought of the Shire, of the green hills and peaceful gardens that would fall to shadow if they failed. There was no choice. We go through the depths, he said. Whatever dwells there, we must face it. The others stared at him, a simple hobbit from the Shire, now speaking with the authority of a war leader. But in his eyes, they saw something that had not been there before, the flame of hope that burns brightest in the darkest hour. The path to the Forgotten Gate lay ahead. The Forgotten Gate lay hidden in a narrow ravine on the northern face of the Iron Mountain, concealed by centuries of rockfall and the deliberate efforts of those who wished it to remain lost. Brock led them through a maze of broken stone and twisted metal, the remnants of ancient dwarven machinery that had once guarded the approach. The dwarves called this place Khazad Gun, Brock explained, as they picked their way through the ruin. The Gate of Shadows. It was built as a secret entrance to their greatest halls, but when the Nameless Thing was awakened, they sealed it and cast it from their record. The gate itself was a marvel of dwarven craftsmanship, even in its current state of decay. Carved from a single piece of black granite, it rose 20 feet into the air, its surface covered with runes that seemed to shift and writhe in the torchlight. The seals are still intact, Galen observed, studying the ancient script, but they're weakening. Another few decades, and the way will be open. Peregrine approached the gate, the staff of Radagast humming with power in his hand. As he drew closer, the runes began to glow with a faint silver light, and he found that he could read them, not with his eye, but with his mind. It's not just a gate, he said wonderingly. It's a warning. The dwarves who built this were trying to contain something that grew stronger with each passing year. The Nameless Thing, Malbeth said grimly, and if the seals fail, then it will be free to walk the earth once more, Peregrine finished. But for now, the way is still barred. We need to find another entrance. It was Thurin who discovered the hidden mechanism, a series of carved stone that, when pressed in the correct sequence, caused a section of the ravine wall to slide aside, revealing a narrow passage that led into the mountain's heart. A maintenance tunnel, Brock identified. The dwarves built many such passages for use when the main gates were sealed. This one should lead to the lower halls. The passage was barely wide enough for a single person, and the air within was thick with the smell of ancient dust and something else, something that made their skin crawl with inexplicable dread. They lit torches and began their descent into the depths. The tunnel stretched for what seemed like miles, winding ever downward through the living rock. The walls were covered with more dwarven runes, but these spoke of different things, of great works and mighty deeds, of the glory days when the mountain rang with the sound of hammer on anvil. But as they descended, the runes began to change. The proud inscriptions gave way to warnings, then to pleas, and finally to something that might have been prayer or curses. It was impossible to tell which. The corruption spreads, Peregrine observed, running his hand along the wall. Whatever lies in the depths, it's been poisoning this place for centuries. They emerged at last into a vast chamber that had once been the heart of the Dwarven kingdom. Great columns rose into the darkness above, and the remains of ancient machinery lay scattered across the floor, like the bones of some mechanical giant. But it was what lay at the center of the chamber that drew their attention, a great pit that seemed to descend into the very foundations of the earth. From its depths came a sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic, and with each breath, the air grew warmer. The Nameless Thing, Brock whispered. It sleeps still, but its dreams poison the world above. Dabku, then we must be careful not to wake it, Malbeth said. The path to Carndum lies beyond this chamber. We must find a way around the pit. They skirted the edge of the great hole, moving as quietly as possible across the rubble-strewn floor. But as they reached the far side of the chamber, a new sound reached their ears, the measured tread of approaching footsteps. From the shadows beyond the chamber emerged a figure that made their blood run cold. It was tall and pale, wearing armor that seemed to be made of shadow itself. Where its face should have been, there was only darkness, and from that darkness came a voice like the wind through a graveyard. "I am the Dwimmerlike," it said, "guardian of the deeps. You trespass in the domain of my master. Turn back, or face the doom that awaits all who disturb the ancient sleep." The rangers drew their weapon, but Peregrine stepped forward, the staff blazing with silver light. "We do not come to wake what sleeps," he said. "We seek only passage to the heights above." The Dwimmerlike laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Passage? There is no passage for the living. The ways above are watched by the Witch King's servant, and the ways below lead only to darkness eternal." "Then we must make our own way," Peregrine replied, raising the staff higher. The silver light blazed brighter, and the Dwimmerlike recoiled with a hiss. But as it did, something else stirred in the depths below, something vast and terrible that had been sleeping for ages beyond count. The breathing from the pit grew louder, and the very walls of the chamber began to tremble. Whatever lay in the depths was beginning to wake. "What have you done?" the Dwimmerlike shrieked. "The nameless thing stirs. Its wrath will consume us all." A roar echoed from the depths, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the world. The pit began to glow with a red light, and shapes moved in the darkness below. "Run!" Malbeth shouted. "The passage to the upper levels. We must reach it before the thing awakens fully." They fled across the chamber as the ground shook beneath their feet. Behind them, the pit erupted in flame and shadow, and something vast and terrible began to climb toward the surface. The Forgotten Gate had been opened, and the Guardians of the Deep were stirring. But ahead lay the path to Carn Dûm, and the final confrontation with the Witch King himself. The escape from the awakening depths was a nightmare of collapsing tunnels and pursuing shadows. The nameless thing's fury shook the very foundations of the mountain, and more than once, only the light of Radagast's staff saved them from being crushed by falling stone. They emerged at last into the upper reaches of the mountain, gasping and battered, in a hall that bore the unmistakable mark of the Witch King's occupation. The ancient dwarven stonework had been carved with new symbols, the Eye of Sauron and the crown of Angmar, wreathed in flames that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. The lower halls of Carn Dûm, Brock identified, his voice hoarse from the dust and smoke. "We're inside the fortress itself." The hall was deserted, but not empty. Strange devices lined the walls, machines of iron and shadow that hummed with malevolent energy. In the center of the chamber stood a great table covered with maps and documents, and upon the table lay a crown of black iron that seemed to drink the light from the air around it. "The Witch King's war crown," Malbeth breathed. "He must be near." Peregrine approached the table, studying the maps with growing dread. They showed the entire north, from the Shire to the Ice Bay of Forochel, and across them were marked the positions of armies, the locations of stronghold, and the routes of planned attacks. "The final assault," he whispered. "It begins within the fortnight. Fornost will fall, and after it, all of Arthedain." But it was not the maps that held his attention. It was a smaller document, written in the black speech of Mordor, that lay beside the crown. As he reached for it, the staff in his hands began to pulse with urgent light. "Do not touch it," came a voice from the shadows. "That parchment bears the seal of the Dark Lord himself." They spun around to find a figure emerging from an alcove they had not noticed. A man in robes of deep blue, with a long white beard and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. But there was something wrong with it, something that made the very air around him seem to shimmer with unnatural heat. "Saruman," Malbeth breathed, his hand moving to his sword. "But you are of the White Council. Why do you serve the Shadow?" The wizard, for wizard he was, though changed beyond recognition, smiled coldly. "Serve? I serve no one, Ranger. I merely recognize the inevitable. The shadow rises, and the wise make their peace with the coming darkness. You lie, Peregrine said, though his voice trembled. The Astari were sent to oppose the shadow, not to embrace it. The Astari were sent to guide, Saruman corrected, and I guide Middle-earth toward its destined fate. The age of men is ending, and the age of shadow begin. Better to rule in darkness than to perish in a futile struggle against the tide of history. He gestured to the maps on the table. The Witch King's plans are flawless. Within a month, all resistance in the north will be crushed. The Shire will burn, Rivendell will fall, and even the hidden realm of Lothlorien will wither before the shadows advance. Ooh, unless we stop him, Peregrine said, raising the staff. The Palantir Fuin, where is it? Saruman's eyes glittered with malice. Ah, the Hobbit seeks the dark-seeing stone. But do you know what it truly is, little one? It is not merely a tool of farsight. It is a trap set by the Witch King himself. Any who dare to touch it are bound to his will, their minds enslaved to serve the shadow. Then King Baron? King Baron was a fool, Saruman interrupted. He thought to master the stone, to turn its power against the Witch King. Instead, he became the first of the stone's prisoners, his spirit bound within its crystal depths. And now, his tortured essence serves as a conduit for the Witch King's power. The revelation hit Peregrine like a physical blow. Their entire mission had been based on a false hope, the belief that they could free the ancient king and turn him against his captor. But if Saruman spoke truly, then approaching the Palantir Fuin would mean certain doom. You begin to understand, Saruman continued. The Witch King has laid a trap within a trap. He allows rumors of the stone's vulnerability to spread, knowing that heroes will come seeking to exploit it. Each one who falls to the stone's power only makes it stronger. But why tell us this? Thurin demanded. If you serve the shadow, why warn us away? Saruman's smile grew broader. Because I have a different use for you. The Witch King grows too powerful, too independent. He forgets that he serves a greater master. But with the right encouragement, he might be reminded of his place. The wizard gestured, and the chamber filled with a sickly yellow light. The rangers found themselves paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Only Peregrine remained free, the staff's silver radiance protecting him from Saruman's influence. You will go to the Palantir Fuin, Saruman commanded, but not to destroy it, to claim it. With the staff of Radagast, you alone might survive the stone's touch. And when you do, you will use its power to bind the Witch King to your will. I'll never serve the shadow, Peregrine declared, though his voice shook with fear. You will, Saruman replied confidently, because if you refuse, your companions die. And after them, everyone you have ever loved in the Shire will suffer the same fate. See, the wizard's words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Peregrine knew that Saruman had the power to make good on his threats, and the lives of his friends hung in the balance. The Palantir Fuin lies in the highest tower of Carn-dûm, Saruman continued. The Witch King guards it personally, but he will not expect an attack from within his own fortress. You have until dawn to reach it. After that, my patience ends. With a gesture, he released the rangers from their paralysis, but the threat remained clear. Comply, or watch everyone they cared about die. There must be another way, Malbeth said desperately. There is, Peregrine replied quietly, but it requires a sacrifice I hoped never to make. He looked at the staff in his hand, feeling the power that flowed through it. The weapon was more than just a tool. It was a conduit for the light of the West, a fragment of the power that had shaped the world in its youth. What sacrifice? Galen asked. The staff, Peregrine said. If I can get close enough to the Palantir Fuin, I can use its power to shatter the stone, but the backlash will destroy the staff, and probably me along with it. No, Malbeth said firmly. There has to be another way. There is no other way, Peregrine replied. This is why the staff came to me, not by accident, but by design. The Valar knew this day would come, and they prepared for it. He turned to face his companion, his round face set with grim determination. Get to the tower. I'll create a distraction that will draw the Witch King's attention. When you see your chance, destroy the stone. no matter what happens to me. Peregrine, Thurin began. This is my choice, the Hobbit said firmly, and my burden to bear. The path to the tower lay ahead, and with it, the final confrontation with the Lord of the Nazgul himself. The ascent to the highest tower of Carn Dûm was a journey through the very heart of darkness. The spiral staircase that wound upward through the mountain's core was carved with images that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight, scenes of battle and conquest, of the rise of the Witch King and the fall of the North. As they climbed, the air grew thicker and more oppressive. The very stones seemed to pulse with malevolent life, and whispers in the black speech echoed from unseen alcove. More than once, they glimpsed shadowy figures watching from the darkness, but when they turned to look directly, nothing was there. The tower is protected by more than stone and steel, Brock muttered, his painted face pale with strain. The Witch King has bound spirits to its walls, the ghosts of all who have died in his service. They paused at a landing where ancient windows looked out over the desolate landscape of Angmar. In the distance, they could see the lights of the Witch King's army, thousands of campfires stretching to the horizon, marking the gathering of the greatest host of evil that the North had ever seen. So many. Galen breathed, even if we succeed here, how can the free people stand against such numbers? One battle at a time, Peregrine replied, though his heart was heavy with doubt. We do what we can, and trust that others will do the same. They resumed their climb, but as they neared the tower's peak, they encountered their first guardian, a creature of shadow and flame that had once been a man, but was now something far worse. The mouth of Sauron had not been idle in his master's service. The Ulari's herald, Malbeth identified grimly, a Nazgul lord, but not one of the nine. This one was made here, in the forges of Carn Dûm. The herald spoke in a voice like grinding stone. Turn back, mortals. The path ahead leads only to despair and death. The Witch King awaits, and his wrath is terrible to behold. We do not turn back, Peregrine declared, raising the staff. Stand aside, or face the light. The herald laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Light? In this place? You are far from the realms of the elves, little one. Here, only darkness reigned. The creature lunged forward, its form shifting between solid flesh and writhing shadow. But the staff's radiance drove it back, and with a shriek of rage, it fled up the stairs before them. It goes to warn its master, Thurin observed. We've lost the element of surprise, perhaps, Peregrine said, but surprise was never our greatest weapon. They reached the top of the tower at last, emerging into a circular chamber that defied description. The walls were made of some black crystal that seemed to absorb light, and the ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of obsidian, and upon it rested the Palantir Fuin. The dark-seeing stone was beautiful and terrible, a sphere of midnight crystal that seemed to contain the depth of space itself. Within its depths, lights flickered like distant stars, and occasionally a face would appear, the tormented visage of King Beren, forever trapped within the stone's embrace. But it was not the Palantir that held their attention, it was the figure standing beside it. The Witch King of Angmar was tall beyond the measure of mortal men, clad in armor that seemed to be forged from the very essence of night. His crown was wreathed in flames that gave no light, and where his face should have been, there was only a void that hurt to look upon. So, the Witch King said, his voice like the wind through a tomb, the little thief comes at last. Did you think to creep into my stronghold unnoticed? I have watched your every step since you left the Shire. Then you know why we've come, Peregrine replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I know you seek to steal my prize, the Witch King replied, but do you know what it truly is? This is not merely a seeing stone, it is a gateway. Through its crystal depths, I commune with my master in Mordor. Through its power, I see all that passes in the north, and through its binding, I hold the spirits of all who have dared to challenge me. He gestured to the stone, and within its depths, more faces appeared, not just King Beren, but dozens of others, warriors and wizards, kings and heroes, all trapped within the crystal's embrace. Your fate is already written, the Witch King continued. You will touch the stone, thinking to destroy it, but instead, you will join the others, your spirit bound to serve me for all eternity. We'll see about that, Peregrine said, raising the staff. The Witch King laughed, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the earth. The staff of Radagast. Yes, I know it well. It was I who arranged for it to find its way to your garden, little hobbit. Did you think it was chance that led you to carry it? You are my tool, shaped and guided to this moment. The revelation struck Peregrine like a physical blow. Everything, his finding of the staff, his knowledge of the ancient texts, even his selection for this mission, had been orchestrated by the enemy himself. But why? He asked, though he feared the answer. Because, the Witch King said, the staff is not just a weapon of light, it is a key, and this chamber is not just a room, it is a lock. When you use the staff's power against the Palantir, you will not destroy it. You will unlock its true potential, freeing the power that lies dormant within. The trap was revealed at last. They had not come to prevent a catastrophe. They had come to cause one. The Witch King had manipulated them from the beginning, using their own heroism against them. The power of the Palantir Fuin, when fully unleashed, will sweep across Middle-earth like a tide, the Witch King continued. All who look upon its light will be bound to my will. The free peoples will kneel before me, and even the elves will serve the shadow. Unless, said a new voice from the shadows, someone prevents you from completing your work. From the darkness stepped a figure that made even the Witch King pause. Saruman, but changed beyond recognition. His robes were now white as snow, and his eyes blazed with the light of the stars. Saruman, the Witch King snarled. You were to ensure the Hobbit's compliance. I was, Saruman agreed, but I find that I prefer the world as it is, rather than as you would make it. The White Council still has need of me, it seems. The wizard raised his staff, the chamber filled with blazing light. The battle for the fate of Middle-earth was about to begin. The battle between Saruman and the Witch King shook the very foundations of Carn Dûm. Light and shadow clashed in the crystal chamber, and the air itself seemed to scream with the force of their conflict. But while the two dark powers struggled for dominance, Peregrine saw his chance. The Palantir Fuin stood unguarded on its obsidian pedestal, and within its depths, the face of King Baron watched him with eyes that held 1,000 years of pain. Now! Malbeth shouted. While they're distracted, Peregrine ran toward the stone, the staff blazing with silver light in his hand. But as he reached for the Palantir, Baron's face appeared more clearly in the crystal, and the ancient king's mouth moved, forming words that only the Hobbit could hear. Stop, Baron whispered. It is not what you think. The stone. It is not a trap. It is a prison, and I am not its only prisoner. What do you mean? Peregrine asked, though his hand was already inches from the crystal surface. The Witch King spoke truth, but not the whole truth, Baron replied. The stone was indeed designed to bind spirits, but not to serve the shadow. It was made by the elves of Rivendell in the days when Angmar first rose. They sought to create a weapon that could hold the Witch King himself. The revelation struck Peregrine like lightning. You're saying the stone is a weapon against the Witch King? It was, Baron confirmed, but the binding requires a willing sacrifice. Someone must take the Witch King's place within the crystal, holding him there for all eternity. That was to be my fate, but I was not strong enough. The stone bound me, but could not hold him. Then what must I do? Peregrine asked, though he already knew the answer. Touch the stone, Baron said. Let it bind you as it bound me, but do not resist its power. Embrace it. Let your spirit merge with the crystal, and with your strength added to mine, we can hold the Witch King fast. But that means you will never see the Shire again, Baron said sadly. Your body will remain, but your spirit will be trapped within the stone forever. It is a price too high for any to pay. Peregrine looked back at his companions, still fighting desperately against the shadows that filled the chamber. He thought of the green hills of home, of the books he would never read, and the gardens he would never tend. But he also thought of what would happen if he failed. The Shire burning, his friends enslaved, all of Middle-earth falling to darkness. No price is too high, he said quietly, if it saves the world. He reached out and grasped the Palantir Fuin. The moment his fingers touched the crystal, Peregrine felt his consciousness torn from his body and drawn into the stone's depths. He found himself in a place that existed between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. A crystal labyrinth where the spirits of the bound wandered like lost souls. "Welcome, young Hobbit," said a voice behind him. He turned to find King Beren standing there, no longer the tormented face in the crystal, but a man in his prime, tall and proud, and bearing the scars of 1,000 battles. "You came," Beren said with wonder. "After all these years, someone finally came." "I came to free you," Peregrine replied. "But if that's not possible—" "It is possible," Beren interrupted, "but not in the way you imagine. The stone can only hold one spirit at a time in its deepest prison. If you take the Witch King's place, then I and all the others will be free. But the cost—" "I understand the cost," Peregrine said, "and I accept it." Even as he spoke, another presence entered the crystal realm, a presence of such malevolence that the very air seemed to turn to ice. The Witch King came, drawn by the stone's power, his spirit seeking to dominate the crystal as he had dominated the world beyond. "You cannot stop me, little hobbit," the Witch King snarled. "I have walked in shadow for 1,000 years. What can a creature of sunlight and gardens do against such power?" "This," Peregrine replied, and called upon the light of the staff of Radagast. The silver radiance blazed through the crystal realm, and the Witch King recoiled with a shriek of rage. But his power was vast, and the light alone could not hold him. "Then we do this together," Beren said, raising his own weapon, a sword that blazed with the light of the stars, as it should have been from the beginning. The battle within the crystal was unlike anything in the waking world. Here, will was reality, and the strength of spirit determined the outcome. The Witch King was mighty, but he faced not one opponent, but many, for all the spirits bound within the stone rose to join the fight. Warriors and wizards, kings and heroes, all united in a single cause, to prevent the Lord of the Nazgul from claiming the stone's full power. The crystal realm became a battlefield of light and shadow, where the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. But even with all their combined strength, the Witch King was too powerful. His will was like iron, forged in the fires of Mordor and tempered by centuries of conquest. One by one, the bound spirits fell before his assault, until only Peregrine and Beren remained. "It's not enough," Beren said desperately. "We need more power, more light to drive back the shadow." Peregrine felt the staff's power flowing through him, but even that was not sufficient. The Witch King was too strong, too well-versed in the ways of domination. "Unless the riddle," Peregrine said suddenly. "In the annals, there was a riddle about the stone. What is the light that conquers shadow? What is the power that breaks all chain?" "I don't know," Beren replied, his strength failing. "I never understood it." But Peregrine did. In that moment of revelation, he understood what the elves of Rivendell had known when they created the stone. The greatest power was not force or will or even magic. It was love. Love of home. Love of friends. Love of all the green and growing things that made life worth living. "Hope," he said aloud. "The answer is hope." And with that word, the crystal realm blazed with a light that had nothing to do with the staff of Radagast. It was the light of the Shire itself, of summer evenings and autumn harvests, of friendship and laughter, and all the simple joys that made existence precious. The Witch King screamed as that light washed over him, and for the first time in 1,000 years, he felt something he had forgotten. Fear. Impossible, he snarled. Hope is a lie. There is only power, only dominion, only the shadow. "No," Peregrine replied, and his voice carried the authority of absolute certainty. "There is more. There is always more." The light blazed brighter, and the Witch King's form began to dissolve. But even as he faded, His malice remained. "You may have won this battle," he said, "but the war is far from over. My master still holds dominion in Mordor, and the Nine still serve his will. You have delayed the inevitable, nothing more." "Perhaps," Peregrine said, "but delay is sometimes enough." The Witch King vanished, his spirit cast into the void beyond the crystal. But the victory came at a price. The stone's power was broken, and with it, the prison that had held the bound spirits. "We are free," Beren said with wonder. "After all these years, we are free to find our rest." One by one, the spirits of the bound began to fade, their long imprisonment finally at an end. But as they departed, each one paused to bow to the small hobbit who had given them their freedom. "What of you?" Beren asked. "The stone is broken, but you remain. You could return to the world of the living." Peregrine looked toward the crystal wall, beyond which lay the chamber where his friends waited. He could feel his body there, still breathing, still alive, but he could also feel the chains that bound him to the stone, chains that were weaker now, but still present. "No," he said quietly, "someone must remain to guard the way, to ensure that what was broken stays broken." "Then you choose the path of the Guardian," Beren said. "It is a noble choice, but a lonely one." "All choices have their price," Peregrine replied. "This is mine to pay." Beren nodded and began to fade. "I will remember you," Peregrine took. "In whatever realm awaits beyond the circles of the world, I will remember the Hobbit who saved us all." And then he was gone, leaving Peregrine alone in the crystal realm. But not entirely alone, for in the depths of the stone, he could still feel the light of the Shire, warm and comforting, and he knew that as long as that light remained, hope would never truly die. The stone was broken, but the Guardian watched still. In the chamber above, the physical battle raged on. The moment Peregrine touched the Palantir Fuin, the entire fortress of Carn Dûm began to shake. The Witch King's scream of rage echoed through the stone halls, and his form began to flicker and fade. "What have you done?" Saruman demanded, his own power wavering as the magical foundations of the fortress crumbled around them. Malbeth and the others watched in amazement as the Witch King's solid form became translucent, his terrible presence diminishing with each passing moment. The Lord of the Nazgul was not destroyed. That was beyond mortal power. But he was banished, cast out from the physical world, and back to the shadow realm from which he had come. "The stone," Thurin breathed. "Look at the stone." The Palantir Fuin was cracking, hairline fractures spreading across its surface like a spider's web. The crystal light within flickered and died, and the faces of the bound spirits vanished one by one. But in the center of the stone, one face remained, that of Peregrine Took, peaceful and still. "He's trapped," Galion said. "The Hobbit is trapped inside." "No," said a new voice. They turned to find Gandalf standing in the doorway, his gray robes billowing in the wind that howled through the broken tower. "He is not trapped. He is transformed." The wizard approached the cracked stone, his eyes filled with sorrow and pride. "He has become what the elves call a Silmari, a guardian of the threshold. His spirit holds the way between worlds, ensuring that the path the Witch King used to enter our realm remains closed." "But he's alive," Malbeth protested. "His body still breathes. His body lives," Gandalf confirmed, "but his spirit dwells now in the space between. He can no longer return to the world of the living, yet he is not truly dead. It is a sacrifice beyond measure." Saruman stepped forward, his earlier treachery forgotten in the face of such nobility. "Can nothing be done? Surely there must be a way to free him." "There is," Gandalf replied, "but it would require opening the way once more, and that would allow the Witch King to return. The choice is Peregrine's to make, and he has made it." As if in response to his word, the Hobbit's face in the crystal stirred. His eyes opened, and he looked out at his companions with a sad smile. "I can hear you," Peregrine said, his voice seeming to come from a great distance. "The stone is broken, but I remain. The Witch King is banished, but not destroyed. Someone must watch the threshold." "Peregrine," Malbeth said, his voice thick with emotion, "there must be another way. "There is no other way," Peregrine replied. "But do not mourn for me. I have saved the Shire and all the lands I love. What greater purpose could any life serve?" Through the crystal, they could see him smile, not the false cheer of one trying to hide his pain, but the genuine joy of someone who had found his true calling. "The war is not over," he continued. "The Witch King will return eventually, and when he does, he will remember this defeat. But for now, the North is safe. Hornost will stand, and the Shire will know." "What would you have us do?" Gandalf asked. "Take word to King Arvedui," Peregrine replied. "Tell him that the Witch King's army will scatter without their master. The threat to Arthedain is ended, at least for now. And tell him also that the price of victory is sometimes higher than we wish to pay." The wizard nodded gravely. "It shall be done. But what of you? Will you remain here, alone in the darkness?" "I will remain," Peregrine said. "But I will not be alone. The light of the Shire burns within me still, and in that light I find all the company I need. Besides," he added with a hint of his old humor, "someone needs to keep an eye on this place. Can't have it falling into the wrong hands again." Even as he spoke, the fortress around them continued to crumble. The Witch King's power had been the mortar that held Carn Dûm together, and without it, the ancient stones began to fall. "We must go," Gandalf said urgently. "The mountain grows unstable." But as they prepared to leave, Peregrine spoke once more. "Wait, there is something else. The nameless thing in the depth. It still sleeps, but it will not slumber forever. When it wakes, it will seek a new master. Be ready." "We will remember," Gandalf promised. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." They departed then, leaving the Hobbit alone with his vigil. As they made their way through the collapsing halls of Carn Dûm, they could hear the sound of the fortress destroying itself, walls cracking, towers falling, the very mountain reshaping itself as the weight of ancient evil was lifted. They emerged into the dawn light to find the Witch King's army in chaos. Without their master's will to bind them, the orcs and wargs had turned on each other, and the host that had threatened to conquer the north was destroying itself in an orgy of violence. "It is ended," Malbeth said, watching the scattered remnants of the enemy flee toward the wasteland of Angmar. "This battle is ended," Gandalf corrected, "but the war continued. The Witch King will return, and when he does, he will remember this defeat. We must be ready." As they began their journey back to the lands of the living, none of them spoke of the price that had been paid, but each carried in his heart the image of a simple hobbit who had given up everything to save the world, and the knowledge that such sacrifice was the truest form of heroism. Behind them, in the ruins of Carn Dûm, the Palantir Fuin lay cracked and dark, but within its crystal depths, a guardian watched over the threshold between worlds, and in his vigilance, the North found its peace. The light of the Shire burned on, eternal and undimmed. The journey back to the lands of the living was longer than their passage into Angmar, for they now carried the weight of victory and the sorrow of loss. The Etten seemed less threatening on their return, as if the defeat of the Witch King had lifted some of the shadow from the ancient marshes. Brock and his hillmen had departed during the night, melting back into the mists of their homeland as silently as they had come. But the grizzled chieftain had left behind a gift, a necklace of carved bone that bore the ancient symbol of the Forodwaith, and with it, a message that Thurin translated from the old tongue. "The branch-bearer is remembered. The debt is paid. They will sing of this in the halls of the hillmen," Gandalf observed. A hobbit who faced the Witch King and lived to tell the tale, though not in the way any of us expected. The Rangers said little during the journey, each lost in his own thoughts. They had accomplished their mission, but the cost had been higher than anyone had anticipated. The hobbit, who had joined them as a scholar and guide, had become something else entirely, a guardian standing watch between the worlds of light and shadow. As they crested the Weather Hills and saw the familiar outline of Weathertop in the distance, Malbeth finally spoke the words that had been weighing on all their mind. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Was the price too high?" Gandalf was quiet for a long moment. his gray eyes fixed on the horizon. "That is not for us to judge," he said finally. Peregrine made his choice freely, knowing the cost. He saved not just the North, but all of Middle-earth. The Witch King's plan would have enslaved every free people from the Shire to Gondor. One life for million. The mathematics of sacrifice is clear. But still, Galen said, to give up everything, home, family, the simple pleasures of life. What kind of existence is that? The existence of a hero, Gandalf replied, and perhaps something more. The elves speak of the Silmari as blessed guardian, standing watch at the boundaries of the world. They do not age, they do not hunger, they do not know the fears that plague mortal mind. In his crystal realm, Peregrine may have found a peace that surpasses understanding. They made camp that night in the ruins of an old watchtower, and as they sat around their fire, Gandalf shared more of what he knew about the Hobbit's fate. The Palantir Fuin was not entirely of evil making, he explained. Its original design came from the elves of Rivendell, who sought to create a weapon that could bind the servants of the Shadow. But the stone was corrupted by the Witch King's touch, turned from a tool of protection into an instrument of domination. And now? Thurin asked. Now it is neither, Gandalf said. Peregrine's sacrifice has purified the stone, returning it to its original purpose. But that purpose is no longer to bind enemies. It is to guard the threshold, to ensure that the way between worlds remains closed to those who would abuse it. How long must he keep this vigil? Malbeth asked. Until the Witch King is destroyed utterly, Gandalf replied, or until the end of the world itself. The Guardians of the Threshold serve until their watch is no longer needed. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, but it was a natural sound, not the fell hunting cry of the wargs they had faced in Angmar. There's something else, Gandalf said, reaching into his robes. Before we left Carn Dûm, I found this among the Witch King's possessions. He produced a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The private writings of Peregrine Took, begun during his years of study in the Shire. He continued writing even after our mission began, recording his thoughts and observations right up until the final battle. Malbeth took the journal with reverent hands. Should we read it? He would want us to, Gandalf said. The last entry is addressed to his friends, to all of us who shared his journey. With trembling fingers, Malbeth opened the journal to the final page. The writing was in Peregrine's careful hand, though it grew increasingly hurried toward the end. If you are reading this, then the deed is done, and the price is paid. I go to my vigil, not with sorrow, but with joy. I have seen the green hills of the Shire, and they are safe. I have walked the paths of friendship, and they are eternal. I have stood against the darkness, and it has not prevailed. Do not mourn for me, dear friends. I am not lost, merely changed. In the crystal realm, I have found a purpose greater than any I could have imagined in my quiet study. I stand watch over the threshold, guardian of the boundary between light and shadow, and in that duty, I am content. Tell my family in the Shire that I died well, in service to something greater than myself. Tell them that the green hills are safe, that the party tree will bloom again, and that their children will know peace because of what was done here. And remember this, the smallest of us can make the greatest difference. A hobbit from the Shire stood against the Lord of the Nazgul and did not yield. If that is not cause for hope, then hope itself has no meaning. The light endures, always the light endured. Your friend in all season, Peregrine Took the Younger. The silence that followed was profound. Even Gandalf seemed moved by the hobbit's final words, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He understood, the wizard said quietly. In the end, he understood what so many heroes failed to grasp, that the greatest victory is not in defeating the enemy, but in preserving what you love. They spent the rest of the night in contemplation, each lost in memories of the brave hobbit who had walked with them into the very heart of darkness. When dawn came, they resumed their journey toward the borders of the Shire, carrying with them the news of victory and the weight of sacrifice. The road ahead was long, but behind them, In the ruins of Carn Dûm, a guardian watched over the threshold between worlds, and in that watching, the North found its peace. From the Chronicles of Fornos, as recorded by the royal scribe in the year 1648 of the Third Age, the news of the Witch King's defeat reached King Arvedui at Fornos 3 days after the battle at Carn Dûm. The great host that had threatened to sweep across Arthedain scattered like leaves before a wind, leaderless and broken. The siege of the capital was lifted, and for the first time in decades, the kingdom knew peace. But the victory came at a price that weighed heavily on all who heard the tale. In the great hall of Fornos, before the assembled lords and ladies of the realm, Gandalf the Grey spoke of the sacrifice that had saved them all. "Let it be recorded," the wizard said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "that Peregrine took the Younger, son of the Shire, guardian of ancient lore, gave his life that the North might live. He stands now as a sentinel between the world, ensuring that the darkness which threatened to consume us all remains forever banished." King Arvedui, though a man not easily moved to emotion, wept openly at the tale. "A Hobbit of the Shire has saved the kingdom of Arthedain," he declared. "Let his name be remembered in all our chronicles. Let songs be sung of his courage, and let his sacrifice never be forgotten." And so it was that the scribes wrote of Peregrine Took in the great books of the realm, and the bards composed songs that would echo through the halls of men for generations to come. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. In the weeks following the battle, a delegation arrived at Fornos from the Shire, led by the old Took himself, accompanied by representatives from all the great families of the Hobbit. They came not seeking honor or reward, but asking only for the truth of what had befallen their kinsmen. Gandalf met with them privately, sharing the full tale of Peregrine's journey and sacrifice. The old Took listened in silence, his weathered face grave with sorrow and pride. "He was always different from the other," the elderly Hobbit said finally, "always more interested in old books and ancient tales than in the practical matters of farming, trade. We thought him a dreamer, lost in fantasies of ages past, but perhaps he was preparing for this all along." "The Valar work in mysterious ways," Gandalf observed. "What seems like chance is often design, and what appears to be folly may be wisdom beyond our understanding." The old Took nodded. "Then let this be our tribute to him. The Shire will remember, not just his sacrifice, but his love for the quiet things of life, the gardens and books, the simple pleasures that make existence worthwhile. He died to preserve these things, and we will honor him by living them." True to their word, the hobbits of the Shire raised a monument to Peregrine Took. Not a great stone tower or bronze statue, but a garden. They planted it in the field behind the Great Smile, where Peregrine had spent his childhood playing among the wildflowers. The garden grew and flourished, tended by generations of hobbits who came to read and study in its peaceful shade. And in the center of the garden, they placed a simple stone marker bearing these words: "Here in spirit walked Peregrine Took the Younger, who gave his life that the Shire might bloom eternal. He loved books and garden, friends and family, and all the green growing things of the earth. His sacrifice saves us still." But the story did not end there. In the years that followed, travelers from the north brought strange tales of the ruins of Carn Dûm. They spoke of a light that sometimes flickered in the broken towers, and of a presence that watched over the wasteland of Angmar. The darkness was held at bay, they said, by a guardian who never slept and never faltered in his duty. Malbeth, who had returned to his service as a ranger, led several expeditions to the ruin. He reported that the fortress remained shattered, its towers fallen, and its halls empty. But in the deepest vault, where the Palantir Fuin had once stood, there was still a presence, a warmth in the cold stone, a light in the darkness. "He keeps his vigil still," Malbeth told King Arvedui. "The Witch King cannot return as long as the Guardian watches. The North is safe." "And the Guardian?" the king asked. "Is there no way to release him from his duty?" "He would not wish it," Malbeth replied. "I have spoken with him. Through the crystal remnants of the stone, he is content with his fate. he has found his purpose, and in that purpose, he has found peace. The years passed, and the threat of Angmar became a memory. Children grew up in the Shire knowing only peace, and the green hills bloomed with abundance. The books in Peregrine's study were preserved and copied, his scholarship adding to the wisdom of the age. His family mourned him, but also celebrated him, knowing that his sacrifice had meaning beyond measure. Gandalf, in his wanderings across Middle-earth, would often pause in his travels to visit the ruins of Carn Dûm. He would sit among the broken stones and speak with the Guardian, who watched from the Crystal Realm, sharing news of the world and the progress of the fight against the Shadow. The Witch King grows restless, the wizard reported during one such visit. He seeks a way to return to the physical world, but the path remains closed. Your vigil holds firm. As it always will, came the reply, the voice seeming to echo from the very stones themselves. I have all the time in the world, and he has none at all. The light endures, Gandalf. It always endured. And so it was that in the year 1975 of the Third Age, when the Witch King finally returned to lead the forces of Angmar, in their last great assault upon the north, he found his power greatly diminished. The Guardian's vigil had weakened the bonds between the Lord of the Nazgul and his earthly realm, and when the combined forces of Gondor and the elves arrived to aid King Arvedui, the Witch King's defeat was swift and decisive. The Battle of Fornost was won, and Angmar was destroyed forever. But those who knew the full tale understood that the victory had been won years before by a hobbit who had chosen to stand guard at the threshold between worlds. In the garden behind the Great Smiles, the flowers bloomed eternal, tended by hands that remembered the one who had died for their beauty. And in the ruins of Carn Dûm, a guardian watched over the threshold, his vigil unending and his purpose clear. The light endures, always the light endured.